It all starts in front of a high-voltage box with a danger and electric shock warning. The young man holds several wires, thinking that if he gets caught now, it'll be the end of the line. Just then, two guys grab the young man as he tries to resist being taken back. In that moment, he realizes that being captured there would mean it's all over for him. So, the protagonist decides to touch the cables together and create a very strong short circuit. But he'd rather make a sacrifice than be captured again, and just like that, a burst of energy happens. With that, all three are hit by the charge, and the boy states that he prefers this outcome. But none of that matters because there is a heart of resurrection beating inside his chest. Even with his body badly hurt, the young man gets up and declares that he will never truly be gone. This is the beginning of the story of Resurrection Boy, and the secret about this special organ. In this world, there are many different hearts, and each one has a unique characteristic. This bizarre mutation affects only a minority of people and brings with it strange abilities. Depending on the type of organ, the user can manifest powers that surpass those of humans. Because of this, these individuals became known to everyone as heart mutants. Many envy this gift and say it's a divine blessing, but the reality is quite different. The protagonist hears this and feels like laughing as he rummages through a trash can. He looks at his own miserable state and blames that power for his life being so difficult. But right now, the priority is to find something to eat, because hunger is driving the young man crazy. Then, the boy finds a piece of bread thrown away and is overjoyed with his luck. Even though it's in the middle of the filth, the survivor starts eating desperately, saying the food doesn't even smell bad. While he's eating, a dog approaches the young man who is squatting near the trash. He notices the animal's presence and asks if the little dog is hungry too, offering a piece. The dog then accepts the food and begins to lick the young man's skeletal hand. But suddenly, several other dogs appear and surround the boy, who hears a strange noise. Scared, he hides behind a wall and peeks out, wondering if it's the guys from the lab. However, he only sees 3 street bullies who are cornering a defenseless student. Realizing the situation, the protagonist is relieved and understands they are just local delinquents. The guys continue to bother the girl, telling her she already knows how the world works. At that moment, the skeleton notices the girl is holding a bag of pet food and understands why she's there. Seeing that injustice, the young man decides to interfere and starts walking toward the group. He tells the aggressors to stop, and they turn around, confused, asking who this homeless person is. Then, the protagonist gets close to one of the guys and states that he is not some homeless person. The bully is terrified upon seeing the skeleton's face up close and starts to scream in fear. At that moment, our hero's arm transforms into a very sharp bone blade. With the weapon in hand, he tells the delinquent to be quiet and get out of there as fast as possible. With that, the bullies run away terrified, shouting that they saw a ghost while the girl watches. The student, still on the ground, tries to stutter out a thank you for the unexpected help. But the skeleton turns to her and points his finger in a very scary way. The girl panics and yells for the creature not to come closer, asking it to stay far away. But he just ignores her distress and picks up the bag of pet food that fell on the ground during the commotion. The student is completely confused by the strange creature's actions. Then, she tells him that the pet food he took was for the street dogs. The skeleton eats a little and apologizes, saying he didn't mean to scare the young woman. He then politely asks if he can have a little of the food, leaving the young woman in shock. Terrified to see that the thing can talk, the girl screams and runs far away from there. The young man watches the scene, having expected this reaction as he's used to it. But he isn't fazed and says that at least now he can eat the pet food in peace. Even though she's scared, the student stays hidden, watching and wondering what that thing was. She starts to question if it was a person, and if it's possible for someone to live in that state. With that, a possibility comes to the young woman's mind, and she wonders if he is a heart mutant. The girl remembers that mutants have bizarre abilities, and that he saved her from the bad guys. Feeling guilty for her reaction, she decides to go back and approaches the skeleton again. Then, the young woman offers a sandwich that was in her backpack to the hungry young man. Surprised and moved, the survivor asks if that sandwich is really for him. The girl confirms and apologizes for running away before, and he thanks her, taking the food. He holds the sandwich and thinks that this is the first time he's received food that looks like this. The boy takes a giant bite and remembers that he had only seen wrappers for that sandwich in the trash. Upon tasting the sandwich, he is delighted and says the flavor is simply divine. He praises how fresh the vegetables, bread, and meat are, and says he could pass on happily. Looking at the student petting the dogs, the protagonist thinks that she is an angel. After a while, the student musters the courage and asks what she should call the skeleton. He then replies that his name is Geo Kim and formally introduces himself to the young woman. With a smile, the girl says it's a pleasure and reveals that her name is Hi Jang. Then, she asks how the young man ended up like this, and he explains that he's on the run from the lab. Frightened, Hi Jang asks about this lab and if he is really being chased. Geo confirms that there is a research center that captures mutants, and they are trying to take him back. The student is shocked because she has heard rumors and asks what they do to him in that place. The skeleton pauses and prepares to tell the truth about his dark past. He reveals that he was used in experiments and suffered for 10 years with tests and procedures. Hi Jai is horrified to learn of the cruelty he faced for an entire decade. Geo explains that all of this happened because of his resurrection heart, which regenerates him. Because of this unique ability, he survived everything, and that's why he ended up in this state. The girl looks at him with a serious and determined expression after hearing the sad story. The young man continues to lament his appearance and the suffering his power has caused him. Suddenly, the student stands up and invites him to go somewhere with her. Geo is confused when the young woman takes his hand and pulls him, saying it will be quick. He is completely in shock as he feels her hand holding his firmly. Even with his scary appearance, a girl had the courage to hold his hand. With a blushing face, the skeleton feels awkward and thinks that she caught him by surprise. Unexpectedly, his bone blade manifests again as he is pulled down the street. Halfway there, the young man's hand comes off, and the student panics as she holds the limb. With that, the girl despairs, and he tries to calm her down, saying that this happens from time to time. The skeleton explains that he just needs to line it up for the arm to stick back on, and asks where they're headed. Moments later, the young man appears in new clothes and a wig. Not quite understanding the situation, Hi Jai then explains that she bought the clothes for him to disguise himself and not attract so much attention. The girl says they are simple pieces, but should serve the purpose for a good while. Geo is moved by the gesture and says he loves the new clothes he got from the young woman. The young man feels very comfortable and says it feels like he has new skin. He gets super excited, but the student warns that the transformation isn't complete yet. The girl says that his face is still visible and that she is going to cover it all with makeup. With that, the young woman finishes the job and reveals her friend's new look with glasses and everything. Hi G feels a bit embarrassed, but Geo likes it, and she says that now no one will recognize him. While the girl hides her face in embarrassment, her cell phone suddenly starts to ring. She checks the time on her device and realizes she's late for her class. With that, the student says goodbye and leaves, leaving Geo alone with the dogs. Running off, she shouts for the young man to take care of the little dogs. While she's away, he stands there, thinking about the name of the girl who helped him that day. That angel's name was Hi Jang, and he would never forget it. The dogs surround him, and he wonders if her request means she'll be back tomorrow. Then, the young man remembers that in the lab, everyone treated him like an experiment. He remembers that in the lab he was an animal, and on the street, everyone ran from him in fear. But IG was the first person in a long time to treat him like a real human being. Lying down with the dogs, he thanks the little dog that led him to meet the student. With that, the young man asks the animal what he should call it while getting a few licks. He then suggests the name Potato and the little dog seems to like the idea and barks happily. Repeating the new name, he remembers how delicious the sandwich he received was. Gio thinks that the young woman who bought him clothes and talked to him is a true angel. Because of this, he looks forward to the next day and hopes to see her again. But suddenly, the protagonist stops smiling and realizes the harsh reality. He calls this thought foolish and understands that he can't put the girl at risk. The young man remembers that he is being hunted, and his presence could bring danger to her. With a heavy heart, the skeleton decides that the best thing to do is to leave. He feels he needs to go back to where he belongs and stay away from good people. So, the young man begins to walk alone through the dark city streets with no destination. After walking for a long time, he finds a sewer entrance near a river. Without a second thought, the young man enters that place to hide from everyone. He ends up fainting on the dirty ground and remains unconscious there for a long time. Upon waking up, the young man is startled to see that he is holding a rat by its tail. He gets up and thinks that he can't just sleep anywhere, as he passed out from exhaustion. Soon after, hunger strikes, and the protagonist feels his stomach rumble loudly. The young man knew he would get hungry, so he saved some pet food before leaving. He decides to eat it while imagining the taste of the sandwich to trick his stomach. With that, the young man eats each piece, as if it were an ingredient, and is surprised by the result. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a strange noise and becomes alert inside his hiding spot. Just then, the dog Potato jumps on him and steals the food from his hand, leaving him desperate. He scolds the animal, saying that the little dog can't eat that. No way. But something seems strange to the skeleton, and he is confused by the whole situation. Then the young man realizes that it's Potato and is shocked that he's there. He doesn't understand how the dog managed to find him in such a remote place. Soon, the young man realizes that if the little animal is there, it means someone else came with him. At that moment, he hears Hi Jang's voice and is thankful that his skull face hides his joy. The student appears with an unfriendly look and asks why he disappeared without telling her. She says she almost couldn't find him and that her joy at seeing him again would be obvious. The girl explains that she followed the scent of the dogs, which is how she found the hideout. With that, she scolds him for putting himself at risk, and he apologizes for making her worry. The young man then confesses that he was afraid of being a burden and decided to leave. With a smile, the young woman says she's very happy to have finally found him. She says that even Potato was worried, and the little dog licks his friend's face. Then the girl says they need to eat and shows a bunch of snacks she brought. Hi Jang says she bought all of it because he only ate one sandwich the day before. The student prepares a different dessert by mixing milk with cookies and offers it to the young man. He is surprised by the mixture of cookies and milk, but the young woman assures him it's very good. The young man feels a new sensation and thinks that yesterday's food was already incredible. With that, he tries the dessert with a small spoon and wonders about the taste. The taste is so good that the young man starts to cry with emotion and says it's delicious. He gets so excited that he offers some to his friend, but she tells him to try the soda. Suddenly, while drinking the soda, his arm begins to regenerate rapidly. The student is very shocked by the scene, and he shows his arm healing right in front of her. His hand is still forming, and the girl watches the process up close, very scared. She then asks if the healing is always this slow, and if it will take days for him to become whole. The young man corrects her, saying that at this rate, a full recovery would take years, leaving her in shock. He thinks that to speed up the process, he needs to absorb a lot of a certain liquid, but decides not to scare her. So the young man changes the subject and says, this is the method using food, and she asks what the other one would be. The skeleton lies and says the other way only works in the lab, and that eating already helps. The girl asks if the lab used to help him, and he explains that they would heal him for the experiments. Because of that, they continue to chase him relentlessly, no matter where he hides. Hearing this, the student understands that this was the reason he ran away without saying anything. He confirms and says she doesn't need to be kind anymore, as their friendship is dangerous. The girl stands up, determined, and yells that they need to go to the police station right now. But the young man says the police would treat him like a monster, and that he was almost targeted before. The girl tells the young man not to worry, revealing that her older sister works as a police officer. With that, she shares an incredible secret, saying that her sister also has a mutant heart, just like him. The skeleton is completely stunned and asks if he heard correctly that the young woman's relative is a mutant. At that moment, the young man remains silent as he reflects on this unexpected revelation, looking at the ground. The student then asks for a leap of faith, assuring him that the officer is a very kind and nice person. But the survivor still seems to be processing the information, his face showing total confusion about it all. Seeing that the mood has become heavy, the girl decides to say goodbye to the animals and says she needs to leave early. Then, she gives the little animals one last pet and mentions that the shelter should contact them soon. Little Potato makes a funny face and barks happily, as if he understands the humans' entire conversation. Alone with the animal, the protagonist thanks him for his help and pets the head of his new best friend. With a determined look, the young man tells himself that this time he won't run away like a coward. He smiles and promises the little dog that he will be back soon to visit and play again in that spot. From a distance, the student waves goodbye as the young man watches her walk away and disappear over the city horizon. Putting on his hood, the young man thinks that after 3 years on the run, someone has finally reached out a hand to help him. He remembers his friend's smile and feels that having someone by his side is a very strange and new sensation. Walking down the street, the hero wonders if he can finally live in peace without having to be a perpetual fugitive. But suddenly, bright lights hit his face, and he stops in the middle of the road, unaware of the imminent danger. Seeing the scene, the girl freezes in terror, her expression changing completely as she notices the fast vehicle. With the violent impact, the skeleton's body is thrown far away, and his glasses fly off as he spins in the air. At that moment, the young man hits the asphalt hard and lies on the ground, showing no sign of reaction. A huge henchman grabs the student, covering her mouth as she tries to scream for her friend. With that, several men in suits run towards the protagonist, and one of them is holding a baseball bat. At that moment, 2 henchmen take the chance and lift the young man's body, who is still dazed. In the background, a lighter is lit, and a small flame illuminates the scene, revealing a new character. A man with a scar lights a cigarette and says that he has finally found that pathetic piece of scrap. The leader then orders them to take him, because he will pay for everything he put them through during the chase. The 3 black cars speed off, taking the captured protagonist to an unknown location. But through the car's rearview mirror, it's possible to see the skeleton being dragged by a rope around his neck. The young man coughs as he is pulled along the asphalt, and we realize that 2 other bodies are being taken along with him. With a face full of anger, the young man curses himself for being captured in such a humiliating way. He needs to stop them at any cost, so he starts digging his hands into the ground to try and stop the car. The protagonist screams that this is all his fault, and his expression shows deep despair. He blames himself because even Hi Jang was dragged into this mess, and now she's trapped inside the car. The friction with the asphalt is completely destroying his hands. But the young man doesn't give up the fight. The young man coughs and continues to be dragged down the road, but he still resists with all his might. He feels powerless and realizes that with his useless ability, he can't do anything to save them. Hopeless, the young man begins to plead for help, asking for someone to please save him from this nightmare. Unexpectedly, several dogs appear out of nowhere and start jumping towards the kidnappers' cars. The little dogs, including Potato, bite the rope hard, and the protagonist is shocked by their loyalty. With that, the animals unite and pull the young man's body back in an attempt to slow down the vehicle and save him. With the combined strength of the animals, the rope finally snaps, and the young man is left behind on the asphalt. Noticing the situation, the vehicle's driver brakes sharply, skidding the tires on the road. The car comes to a complete stop, and the protagonist is left lying on the ground, surrounded by all his four-legged friends. The dogs bark and snarl, protecting the young man's injured body, who is badly hurt on the ground. Inside the vehicle, one of the kidnappers gets angry and curses when he sees that the animals are messing everything up. With that, the men in suits get out of the car and prepare to face the pack of furious dogs. One of the henchmen scoffs and asks if the mutts are crazy as the animals continue to snarl. The skeleton on the ground seems to be losing consciousness and tries to shout for his friends to stop. Losing patience, the aggressors begin to attack the little dogs with baseball bats without any mercy. With great effort, the young man tries to get up, as he can't stand to see the little animals fighting in his place. He clenches his fist and focuses, knowing he needs to do something to help his friends. At that moment, one of the dogs bites one of the men's legs with great force, even though it's injured. The protagonist gets an idea and remembers that he needs a certain liquid to regenerate faster. He decides he will absorb the fluid that was spilled on the ground to try to recover a part of his body. With that, the young man drags himself with difficulty towards a puddle of the liquid on the asphalt. But before he can reach his goal, one of the henchmen steps on his hand, preventing him from moving. The aggressor continues to attack the animals, and the young man realizes he needs to recover to be able to help. Suddenly, the protagonist looks to the side and sees Potato's body lying lifeless on the ground. The young man's face fills with horror, and his eyes go wide at the tragic scene he is witnessing. In shock, he calls out his canine friend's name and can't believe the little dog is gone. He looks around and sees the bodies of the other little dogs lying lifeless on the ground. The young man calls out his friends' names, but the scene is one of total desolation and sadness. At that moment, the young man remembers the 10 years he spent trapped in that laboratory. He lived in chains and suffered all sorts cruel experiments at the hands of the scientists. Every day they would give him a red substance and take parts from him in an unimaginable ordeal. The routine was always the same, and because of his power, he couldn't even choose when his end would come, until one day he planned an escape and, by a miracle, managed to get out of that place. The young man thought he would finally be happy and free from that nightmare that lasted so long. But reality was very different, as the people on the outside looked down on him. Everyone felt fear and disgust at his appearance and treated him as if he were a monster. Because of this, he ended up living in isolation in the trash, feeling like an outcast. But something inside him begins to pulse with a very strange and powerful energy. Then the protagonist remembers the dogs and the student, who were the only ones to be kind. They treated him like a human being, and this awakens a hidden power within his body. With that, all the spilled liquid on the ground begins to move towards him rapidly. The red substance envelopes the young man, and a sinister energy takes over the entire area. The young man absorbs all of the fluid, and his body begins to regenerate in an incredible way. His muscles and skin form again, and he feels stronger than ever before. With that, the fluid condenses around his arm, forming a protective and very resistant layer. At that moment, a new power awakens, and his regeneration reaches a completely unbelievable level. With the power of the absorbed liquid, his hand regenerates completely in the blink of an eye. At that moment, a red and very dense energy begins to surround the protagonist's body. Then his face also recovers, and his eyes glow with a very intense red color. The young man's body returns to normal, and he regains the human appearance he had long ago. He looks at his own hand, surprised, and realizes his physique is completely different. The young man confirms that he is no longer a skeleton, and that everything is back to how it was before. He remembers when he was a child, and his unique nature already made him incredibly strong. But suddenly, the young man realizes something terrible about the origin of the substance that healed him. The liquid that regenerated him came from the little dogs who were lost trying to protect him. The henchmen are terrified by the scene and ask their boss what they should do now. The leader ignores his men's fear and advances with a knife to try and capture him. But the hero is much faster and lands a powerful punch right in the aggressor's face. The blow is so strong that it sends the henchman's body flying backward with unbelievable force. With that, the man flies and crashes into the side of the car, denting the entire bodywork. He gets stuck in the vehicle's door, completely knocked out after the surprise attack. With the path clear, the young man picks up Little Potato's body and holds it carefully. Crouching on the ground, he hugs his canine friend and mourns the loss of his companion. With a dark look, he states that he knows the most painful way for a person to pass on. The other aggressors are terrified, and he promises something terrible for whoever answers first. The scene shifts to an isolated warehouse, which appears to be the secret base for some very dangerous and cruel men. Several black cars are parked in the yard, indicating the place is full of armed and alert henchmen. Suddenly, someone pulls a dark bat off the head of a person who was being held hostage there. Hi, Jae-san looks around in despair, asking who these people are as she tries to understand her current situation. At that moment, the young woman realizes she's in a very sinister place, and her face fills with deep, genuine fear. Several delinquents surround the student, smiling wickedly, as if they're enjoying her panic. With that, the girl wonders where she is and why she was taken to this hideout in the middle of nowhere. She looks to the side and sees a horrible sight, strange people handling some biological samples, leaving her in total shock. But soon, one of the men grabs the young woman's hair forcefully and tells her to stop making so much noise. The group's leader approaches and asks if she happens to have several extra lives to be screaming like that. Then the villain shows a photo of the skeleton and claims she's only there for helping that darned mutant. He tells the young woman to keep her mouth shut if she wants to make it through this when it's all over. With a cruel look, the man says that nobody would care if 1 or 2 people disappeared from there today. The student freezes as she stares into the kidnapper's cold eyes, realizing he isn't joking at all. Unexpectedly, a cell phone starts ringing inside the leader's jacket pocket, interrupting the tense and scary moment. The man answers the call and asks why his subordinate is calling instead of just showing up with the target. On the other end of the line, the henchman talks about the dogs, and the villain is confused, not understanding what happened. The subordinate reports that the bone monster turned into a human, and that the animals were to blame for it all. At this, the boss gets furious and demands that the man speak clearly, so he can understand the situation. Hi Jang overhears the conversation and wonders if the little dogs really showed up to save her friend at that moment. The boss asks over the phone if the subordinate is saying they lost the skeleton. At this, he freaks out and yells that the target was very valuable and that the henchman is useless garbage. Then the man kicks something in anger and threatens his men if they can't capture him again. Furious, he turns to the girl and asks where her friend has gone at this very moment. The villain yells that she needs to tell him everything now and complains that he lost a lot of money with the escape. Terrified, the student says she knows nothing, and the kidnapper laughs mockingly. At this, he pulls out a blade and threatens to rough her up a bit to see if her memory comes back. The young woman remembers her friend warned her about being followed, but she acted foolishly and paid no mind. With the blade near her face, she thinks about what she should do to escape this dangerous situation. Just then, the aggressor prepares to harm her, but something unexpected happens inside. Suddenly, one of the henchmen is thrown forcefully into another, and both fall to the ground, out cold. The other delinquents turn around, startled, and brace themselves for whatever has just invaded the place. At the door, the protagonist appears in human form with a very powerful and dark aura of vengeance. The group's leader turns to the entrance and is completely confused upon seeing the mysterious figure standing there. The young man's face is covered by shadows, and the villain asks who this strange boy standing at the door is. At this, one of the men approaches the youth and calls him a beggar because of his torn and dirty clothes, but the hero grabs the aggressor's neck with absurd speed and begins to squeeze with great force. The delinquent can't breathe and wonders what kind of strength the young man is using now. With a cold stare, the protagonist explains that because of them, something very bad has just happened. Then he reveals that, because of them, all the little dods were lost on that tragic night. The leader yells for his henchmen to take care of the intruder, and two of them rush to attack. With that, one of the men lands a powerful punch right in our hero's face, but he doesn't even flinch from the blow and maintains a very calm and frightening expression. Then the young man retaliates with an even stronger punch that lands squarely on the aggressor's chin. The impact is so brutal that the delinquent is thrown far away, and the protagonist keeps going. Just then, another henchman grabs him from behind and yells that he's finally got him pinned. Soon, another one joins in, and the two of them hold the young man while pulling his hair forcefully. Even though he's hurt, his eyes glow with an intense red color, and he seems stronger than ever. He then uses the momentum and throws one of the men over his shoulder with incredible strength. The boss and the others are completely shocked by the young man's display of superhuman power. The hero gets up slowly and looks at the floor with an expression of deep hatred. With his eyes glowing, he asks if they were sent by the Hermes laboratory to capture him. The student is in disbelief, and her expression changes completely as she witnesses the scene. She then realizes that boy is Geo, and is shocked by his new human appearance. The boss also understands everything and yells that the boy was the skeleton all along. He remembers the warning that he might not recognize him if he regenerated completely. Suddenly, the leader pulls out a weapon and fires at the protagonist's back, who feels the impact. The villain thanks him for coming back on his own and points the weapon at the young man's wounded body. With that, he orders his men to grab all the weapons they received as payment for the job. The henchmen obey, and they all start firing in the hero's direction without any mercy. The boss yells that they'll make a lot of money if they capture him, and tells his men to fire nonstop. With that, the young man is hit by several shots, and the villain orders them to fire until he can't regenerate. The shots keep hitting the young man's body, which is being completely pierced by the projectiles. He feels a terrible pain, and red liquid runs all over his face and torn clothes. The protagonist thinks about how his flesh is being torn apart by the projectiles passing through him. His bones are also being shattered by the rain of projectiles that won't stop. He feels that his lungs have been pierced, and because of that, he can't even breathe properly. Seeing the scene, the student despairs and screams for them to stop their cruelty. After so many shots, the hero's body finally falls to the ground, and the men celebrate his fall. The young man lies there on the ground, full of wounds, and it seems he has finally been defeated by them. But suddenly, his hand starts to move, and he touches the pool of red liquid around him. With that, the red liquid on the floor begins to be absorbed back into the young man's body. The red liquid from the defeated henchman on the floor flows toward the protagonist to heal him. At that moment, his heart of resurrection glows intensely and pulses with an absurd amount of energy. One of the henchmen notices the situation and yells desperately to the boss, warning him of the danger. The man yells that the target is coming back to life, and the young man's body begins to rise on its own. The group's leader is terrified and says he's getting up as if he were a zombie. The red liquid moves around his body and begins to heal all the wounds from the shots. Desperate, the villain orders the men to fire again and asks if they're just going to stand there watching. He feels each projectile entering his body, but this time his expression is very different. Even while taking shots to the head, he thinks that the projectiles are tearing him apart completely, but even with so many injuries, his body continues to recover in a bizarre way. But the young man realizes the pain isn't as strong as he initially imagined it would be. This is because the young man has been through much worse things in his dark past. He then remembers when he was a child and endured all sorts of torment in the laboratory. The boy was crushed by giant presses and used in cruel and inhumane tests all the time. Because of this, the protagonist claims that the experiments in that place were much more painful. Back in the present, he lands a powerful punch on the face of one of the nearby delinquents. The blow is so strong that the man is thrown far away with incredible force. With a hateful glare, The hero says that something like firearms is nothing to him now. He claims he can take this all day, and the aggressor is left with a badly bruised face. The other henchmen are terrified as they watch the young man move around with superhuman ability. However, the protagonist hits another henchman with a devastating, fast, and precise blow. The man tries to defend himself, but the force of the attack is too great, and he feels the impact of the punch. At this, the delinquent flies and crashes into a metal tank, and the hero thinks about what's driving him crazy. What angers him most is remembering the little dogs who sacrificed themselves to try and protect him. Then he unleashes his fury and starts attacking all his enemies with an absurd and fatal speed. The memory of Little Potato smiling comes to his mind, fueling his great anger even more. He continues to fight, thinking about the fact that he couldn't protect his only true friends. Seeing the chaos, the boss grabs the student and flees, yelling for the young man not to come any closer. With that, the boss threatens to shoot the student if the young man gets any closer. But the hero ignores the blackmail and lands a devastating punch right on the kidnapper's face. The blow lands squarely, and the villain feels the full force of the unexpected and brutal attack. With a look full of hatred, the young man shows that he will have no mercy for this man. He yells that he'll never be able to see his friends again, and throws the villain with a final punch. Then the man's body flies and crashes into a metal tank, which dents from the impact. The group's leader lies there, his face completely bruised after the beatdown. He looks at the protagonist with deep fear and realizes he's in serious trouble now. Terrified, the aggressor begs to be spared and promises to do anything he's told. But the young man stares at him with cold eyes and says it's far too late for any kind of forgiveness. He then lands a powerful kick right on the villain's head, who screams in pain from the attack. The impact is so strong that the ground cracks, and the man tastes red liquid in his mouth. The hero continues to attack, landing another punch with all his strength on the enemy's face. Without stopping, he delivers a sequence of rapid and brutal blows to the kidnapper's body. The speed of the punches is so great that the man can't even react in time to defend himself. After the beatdown, the villain's face is disfigured, and the young man observes the scene coldly. Red liquid drips from the protagonist's hand, which is injured after so many blows. He stands over the defeated body of the boss, who no longer moves on the dirty floor. The camera pulls back, and we see all the henchmen down and the warehouse in a state of total chaos. The young man takes a deep breath, and vapor comes out of his mouth, indicating the battle is finally over. With the battle over, the student calls her friend's name, her voice a little shaky and relieved. Then the young man starts walking toward her, his bare feet on the dirty warehouse floor. He continues to approach, and the girl watches him with a concerned expression on her face. The young man stops in front of his friend, who is still sitting on the floor, and looks at him, not knowing what to say. The young woman asks if he's okay, as she remembers he took many shots before falling to the ground. Suddenly, the hero drops to his knees and hugs the student tightly, surprising her with his action. With tears in his eyes, the young man feels relieved to see that his friend is safe and sound with him. Hi Jang says she's so happy he's alive and hugs him back affectionately at that moment. He then confesses with a sad voice that the dogs passed away to save him from that cowardly attack. The young man says he was so scared that she might get hurt in all the confusion too. Because of this, he repeats that he's so happy she's alive, and the hug gets even tighter. Confused, the girl wonders why he's thanking her at such a difficult and strange moment. With her hand on his chest, she can feel how shaken her friend is by the whole situation. The student says she's the one who should be thanking him for saving her life in there. At the scene, the police arrive, and the detective shouts for the officers to take the suspects to the station right away. At that moment, one of the henchmen who survived the brawl is handcuffed by an officer as he lowers his head in defeat. The warehouse is full of criminals, and the investigators wonder how so much destruction occurred in an internal dispute. From a distance, the pair watches the police cars move, and the girl wonders if they shouldn't be investigated too. But the young woman explains that her sister told them to stay away because things get complicated when mutants are involved. So they decide to leave and let the older woman handle the whole mess under the light of the full moon. Unexpectedly, the student starts to cry loudly because of the tragedy she has just witnessed. The young man can't hold it in either and starts to sob while hiding his face in his hands, overcome with deep sadness. He looks at the little dogs lying on the ground and apologizes for not being able to protect his small friends. The hero remembers the name of each of the animals who gave their lives for him and feels an enormous emptiness in his heart. With that, the young woman hugs one of the pets and says it's all her fault, as the little animals only wanted to save her from the bad guys. She regrets not taking better care of them and cries, thinking that the brief moments of affection became everything to the dogs. At this, the protagonist bites his own finger hard and states that it's not her fault because the animals passed away for him. The student is in shock and asks what her friend is doing when she sees the wound he caused himself. But the young man explains that he can heal with blood and wonders if his special fluid could bring his friends back. With a determined look, he lets the red liquid drip onto the animal's body, hoping for a miracle. The young man focuses all his will on this unusual plan, hoping his mutant nature can achieve the impossible. Even in pain, he continues to injure his own hand and wonders why the regeneration is acting so fast now. He bites even harder as the red liquid flows, and the hero seems to completely ignore the physical pain he's feeling. Seeing his sacrifice, his friend holds his arm and asks him to stop, as the little dogs would be even sadder to see that. With a sad face, he wonders if the dogs don't hate him for passing away because of him. But his friend holds his hand and explains how much the little animals truly loved him. She tells him that at first they were very skittish and didn't like people, but with him it was different. The young man is surprised and wonders if they really were suspicious of all humans. The young woman confirms this, saying they had many scars from mistreatment and bad memories. While petting one of the pets, he admits he had no idea, as he thought they were just gentle. Because of this, the girl asks him not to blame himself, as that would break their hearts too. The protagonist sits there with one of the animals on his lap, thinking about everything he's heard. With a smile, the young woman says that the fact they approached him without hesitation like that probably means they sensed that their friend was in a situation similar to their own. The young man then thanks her for the comforting words, and the two remain silent for a moment. Suddenly, a soft whimper catches the pair's attention, and they look in the direction of the sound. At that moment, Potato's puppy appears, and the student is very relieved to see he survived. Without understanding, they watch the little dog walk slowly toward them in the clearing. The puppy stops right in front of the young man and wags its tail while staring intently at him. With that, the hero asks the little one if he doesn't hate him, since his family was lost because of him. But in response, the little animal licks the young man's hand as if to say everything is okay. The young man is touched by the scene, and his friend comments that it seems the puppy really likes him too. Suddenly, the little dog falls asleep in the hero's arms, and she says he must be very tired. The student then thinks about what to do, and considers taking the newborn home with her. The young woman thinks about what to do with her friend and the puppy, since the guys from the lab are not normal. With that, she asks him to wait a bit, and runs to call her sister for help. On the phone, the young woman explains the situation and asks where they should go now that everything is over. After the call, the two walk through the city, and the young man holds the little puppy carefully. They then arrive at a large apartment building that seems to be the home of the student and her family. Upon entering, the young man looks around the house, and his friend tells him to come in and make himself completely at home. But he hesitates at the door, wondering if it's right for someone as dangerous as him to enter her house. The student smiles and says he risked his life to protect her, so there's no reason to be afraid. Besides, she reveals that her sister wants to meet him because he might be able to help with a case about the lab. So the young woman convinces him to come inside, and the protagonist finally accepts his friend's invitation. At this, he sees his own reflection in a window and gets confused by the image he's seeing. Suddenly, the hero has a breakdown and gets scared by what he sees, startling the girl with his reaction. He then grabs his friend's shoulders and yells that his face is back, with cheeks, a nose, and even lips. The young man explains that he didn't know because his face hadn't regenerated since his childhood in the lab. With his hands on the glass, he stares at himself and realizes he's finally seeing his true appearance. Shocked by the story, the young woman drinks some water and says something has been bothering her for a while. She then asks his age, because now that he's regenerated, he doesn't look like an old man at all. The young man becomes thoughtful and says it's been so long that he doesn't even remember thinking about his own age. He remembers entering the lab at 7 years old and escaping 3 years after 7 annual tests. After doing the math, the young man says he's 17 years old, and his friend spits out her water, surprised by the revelation. The girl is shocked and asks why he let her call him sir, if they're the same age. With a blushing face, the young man explains that he was just happy she treated him like a human being. The student is left completely speechless upon hearing her friend's sincere and sad answer. At this, she thinks the situation is a bit pitiful, but at the same time she finds his attitude very cute. So the young woman suggests they call each other by their names and invites him to eat after a shower. Meanwhile, the little puppy takes the opportunity to devour his bowl of food with great enthusiasm. At the table, the protagonist, now in clean clothes, prepares for his first real meal. With wide eyes, he tries the food and shouts that everything is warm and delicious. His friend gets embarrassed and says it's just a simple dish, apologizing for not being a good cook. But the young man insists, stating that this is the best food he has ever tasted in his entire life. The young woman then explains that her sister had something unexpected come up and won't be able to meet them today as planned. With the plates completely empty, it's clear how hungry the young man was, and how much he enjoyed the dinner. Because of this, she points to the couch and says he can sleep there tonight to rest. She hands a blanket to her friend, who feels awkward but thanks her for her hospitality. With a smile, the student says goodbye and mentions she's going to her room to do her homework. Then the bedroom door closes, and the young man is left alone in the living room for the first time. Holding the blanket, he observes his surroundings, still getting used to his new reality. His eyes analyze every detail of the house, and he is amazed by the normality of it all. The hero is startled when he sees the television and wonders how it can be so big and thin. Seeing the flowers in a vase, he thinks about how different this place is from the cold, lifeless laboratory. He lies down on the couch and is surprised by how comfortable it is, much softer than his bed at the lab. Meanwhile, the little dog drinks some water but ends up throwing up a bit of the food he ate earlier. The puppy seems to be very sick, and the protagonist turns around, startled by the scene. At this, the hero realizes what happened and looks at his little friend with a shocked expression. The little animal continues to bring up his food and seems very weak and frail. Desperate, the young man yells the puppy's name, his face overflowing with pure worry. With that, he runs toward the puppy to try and help in some way during that tense moment. The young man stops in front of the little one, who just stares at him with a confused expression, not understanding. But suddenly, the little animal seems perfectly fine and just tilts its head to the side. The hero then realizes it was nothing serious and feels relieved, thinking it was a false alarm. Later, the two lie down on the couch, and the puppy snuggles up next to him in a very cute way. With the puppy on his shoulder, he thinks about how warm and cozy this place is for sleeping peacefully. Smiling, the young man asks his new companion if he's also enjoying their new safe home. Then he starts thinking of a name, and since the father was Potato, he suggests the name French Fry. The hero decides to call him Fry, and the little one seems to really like the name as he gets a pat. With that, he finally understands what happiness is, and falls asleep feeling a warmth in his heart. His memories of that day flash through his mind, and he remembers the meal he ate earlier. He also recalls the warm shower he was able to take for the first time in a long while. The memory of being able to wash with warm water makes him very happy and grateful for that moment of peace. And finally, he remembers that he can now sleep peacefully in a very comfy place like this. While sleeping peacefully, he has a nightmare and thinks about how fragile happiness is. With a sad smile, he reflects that all of this can be lost very easily. He then remembers escaping from the lab with other mutants who were running in desperation. Back then, he and his companions ran toward the exit, hoping to finally be free. But the guards of the facility appear and say they can't lose those valuable mutants. Suddenly, an explosion happens, and two of the fugitives are thrown with brutal force. The hallway floor breaks, and the young people fall amidst the rubble with no chance of escape. One of the soldiers readies himself and points an energy weapon in the direction of the mutants on the ground. The tip of the weapon glows with an intense light, preparing to fire a devastating attack. But the shot is deflected and hits the guards themselves, who are caught by surprise by the attack. The other soldiers are completely shocked by what just happened right in front of them. At that moment, a girl with black hair uses her ice powers to attack the enemies. On the floor, The protagonist seems to be in shock, and the young woman yells for him to wake up from his trance. Meanwhile, one of the boys uses his powers to hold the floor together, preventing everyone from falling. With a determined look, he does his best to protect his friends from that deadly trap. The skeleton then looks forward with new determination and finally prepares to act. The girl extends her hand to him and yells for them to hurry, as the exit was very close. The young man then takes his friend's hand, and the two prepare to continue their desperate escape. He remembers how hard they ran, but they ended up getting separated in the end. Back in the present, the young man opens his eyes, and the nightmare finally comes to its sad end. Lying in bed, he thinks about his friends from the lab and wonders if they are suffering somewhere. Because of this, he swears he won't let anyone take away the small piece he has now found. His scars glow faintly, and he reinforces his promise to protect his new friend at all costs. With that, his mutant heart pulses strongly, and he decides to fight for this newfound happiness. With a serious look, the young man warns that if anyone tries to ruin his moment of peace and quiet, he won't let it slide, and will do whatever it takes to get revenge on whoever dares to do so. The next day, a desperate scream echoes through the city, catching the attention of everyone around. Someone is running hurriedly through the streets, and their quick footsteps indicate that something very serious has happened. At this moment, we see the protagonist running and shouting the name of his little puppy, Fry. With tears in his eyes, the young man yells desperately and asks where his only friend has gone. The student announces she's leaving for school, and the young man becomes curious upon hearing such an unfamiliar term. At this, the girl explains that her sister only comes back at night and asks him to take good care of the house during the day. Then the young woman says goodbye, and the hero thinks that this school thing must be a lot of fun. Suddenly, she notices that little French fry is whimpering and scratching the wall with great enthusiasm. With that, the two observe the little animal's strange behavior as he keeps making noise in the corner. Curious, the student asks if the pet wants to go out, and the young man notices the animal doesn't seem sick, just bored. So the protagonist decides he's going to take his little companion for a walk on the street right now. Even so, his friend shows concern and asks if the dangerous men aren't still after him out there. With a smile, the young man states that everything is fine because no one will recognize his new human face. Relieved, the young woman agrees with his argument and feels more at ease, knowing the hero is safe now. At this, the girl points to the drawer where the leash is and gives him the door code so he can go out. Once outside, the young man tries to control the little animal, who starts jumping and barking non-stop on the street. With great difficulty, the young man tries to hold the pet and realizes that walking a dog is quite complicated. Seeing little Fry struggle, he wonders if the accessory around its neck is making his friend uncomfortable. The hero worries as he notices the animal's whining and becomes afraid that he tightened the leash too much. At that moment, the young man covers his face and remembers when he himself was held by heavy chains. In a flashback, the boy recalls the torment in the lab, where he received terrible shocks while tied up. Because of this trauma, he thinks other people might not like the animal and gets lost in thought. Then the protagonist lets go of the leash and apologizes to the little animal, who disappears from sight in an instant. Suddenly, the young man goes into total shock and desperately realizes that little French fry has run away from him on the street. The hero screams desperately for the little animal's name as he runs through the streets hoping to find him soon. Tears run down his face, and he wonders where his only companion has gone in such a tense moment. The journey of the resurrected boy continues, now with the disappearance of the pet that turned his world upside down. He then runs past several people on the sidewalk and begs for the pet to answer his urgent call. At this, the young man starts rummaging through trash cans and looks into every dark hole, his heart pounding hard. He then kneels down to look under abandoned debris, but only finds a few scared little mice there. Desperate, the young man checks behind a huge dumpster and continues his frantic search throughout the strange neighborhood. Just then, he sits on the ground and starts to cry, wondering how he'll find the puppy in such a huge place. Lost in thought, the hero imagines the worst and is terrified by the idea of the pet being run over by a truck. But his fear grows even more when he thinks that mean people could capture and hurt his little friend. The young man cries bitterly and blames himself for losing the pet just one day after promising he would always protect him. Suddenly, he stops in an alley and sees a building in the distance that seems to be the school his friend mentioned earlier. Looking at the field, he sees some students playing ball, and finally spots the little dog hidden among the bushes. Little Fry is calmly licking his paw in the middle of the thicket, with no idea of the worry he caused his owner. Then the protagonist runs at full speed toward the thicket, wondering if the pet followed the girl's scent. Unexpectedly, a man passing by gets confused and looks to the side, trying to understand what's happening. With that, the young man flies past the man who tries to grab him but can't even touch the rushed youth's clothes. The instructor is in total shock and wonders how someone can be so fast as he watches the blur go by. The hero continues his desperate run, and the man yells for him to wait, but his only focus is on rescuing his pet. Meanwhile, the students continue their soccer game, unaware that a powerful mutant is now invading the premises. With that, we see the students having fun in the courtyard, while the atmosphere at the school seems lively and peaceful. In the bleachers, some students are resting and chatting about the day's gossip in a very relaxed way. Hidden behind a tree, the hero observes the area cautiously so as not to be noticed by anyone at that moment. Just then, he focuses his gaze on a specific group, trying to catch every detail of their seemingly important conversation. Soon, the young people start discussing the origin of mutants, and whether the rumors about the lab are actually real. One of the boys shows on his phone that the reward for a captured mutant is as high as 1 billion won. Hearing the astronomical amount, the protagonist realizes how people on the outside see his kind merely as a commodity. With that, the young man decides he needs to find the puppy quickly and get out of there before something bad happens to him. Meanwhile, Little Fry runs happily across the courtyard, with no idea of the danger that now surrounds him. In another corner of the school, some girls are recording a dance challenge to post on their social media with great excitement. After finishing the recording, they check the video and praise each other's beauty while smiling a lot. Then the group's leader looks at her phone, very proud of the result, as her friends continue with their exaggerated compliments. Unexpectedly, the little animal appears, running towards the young women who are surprised by the cute and furry visitor. Charmed, they pick up the pet and start showering him with affection because he's so small and adorable. At this, the students decide to take a picture with their new friend to post on their stories and get lots of clicks that afternoon. But when they see the result of the picture, they notice a dark figure right behind them and let out a scream of pure terror. Terrified, the young women accuse the hero of being a weird stalker who was secretly taking pictures of them. Embarrassed, the young man steps out from behind the tree and apologizes, explaining that he was just looking for his pet. With a very shy expression, the young man states that he didn't mean to scare anyone and just wants his puppy back soon. At that moment, the girl's attitude changes, and they start to blush upon noticing that the puppy's owner is actually very handsome. With that, the young women look at his clothes and realize he must be a new student, since they've never seen him at school before. Then the young man asks if he interrupted their video, and the group's leader asks if he wants to be in the recording too. At this, the other students giggle and say he's very cute, while the hero insists he can't appear in videos at all. But the girl ignores his comment and holds out her phone, asking for his social media handle so they can follow each other. With the puppy in her arms, she says she'll tag his profile in the post, and her friends watch the situation closely. The young women comment among themselves that this is the first time their friend has asked for someone's contact info and say the guy really has a handsome face. Just then, the hero gets confused, not understanding what a photo app is, and the girls say her account is very famous around there. With a sly look, the young woman thinks the new guy is pretty cute and that his shyness makes him a perfect accessory for her to use. But the protagonist backs away and confesses that he doesn't have any kind of social media, leaving the girls baffled by his answer. At that moment, the group's leader freezes and wonders if she heard correctly what the young man just told her. Then the young man bows and thanks her for the invitation, but states that he has to decline and apologizes for causing trouble. Her friends are in total shock and comment that they can't believe the most popular girl in school just got rejected like that. With that, the young woman gets furious and thinks the hero is playing hard to get, as it's impossible for someone not to want her contact info. Unexpectedly, the young man takes Little Fry back and says he's taking the pet home, while the student seethes with anger inside. He hugs the pet and apologizes for getting lost, promising it will never happen again. But in the distance, a red-haired delinquent watches everything and becomes possessed with rage at the scene he's witnessing in the courtyard. The bullies' friends are also watching and wonder who that strange guy talking to their boss's girlfriend is. With that, one of the youths asks if that isn't his girl, and the guy confirms with a very scary and heavy stare. The hero continues to pet the little animal, not realizing that the gang of troublemakers is watching his every move. The villain grinds his teeth in fury and thinks the protagonist is hitting on his girlfriend right in front of his eyes. With that, the delinquent asks for the ball from one of his buddies, who doesn't understand the reason for the sudden request. But the bully ignores him and prepares to kick with all his might while his friend screams in desperation at the scene. The kick is so powerful that the ball completely deforms from the absurd impact of the blow. With that, the object flies toward the target, and the aggressor states that he doesn't care one bit about the consequences. Then the ball goes straight toward the protagonist, who is holding Little Fry, and is surprised by the unexpected attack. But instead of dodging, he stops the object with his face and stares at the enemy with a very cold and threatening look. His serious expression shows that he won't let this cowardly and unprovoked attack slide. With that, the little puppy remains completely safe in its owner's arms, who bravely protected it from the blow. The impact is so strong that it kicks up dust, but the hero doesn't even move from his spot, and the girls are shocked by the scene. Just then, one of the students approaches, concerned, and asks if he's okay after that ball to the face. But suddenly, red liquid starts dripping onto the ground, and the young woman screams in fear upon seeing his injury. The aggressor approaches, feigning concern, and says it was an accident because he didn't mean to hit anyone with the ball. With a fake smile, he apologizes for the mistake, and his girlfriend asks if the young man was badly hurt by the blow. Then the bully tells the young man to be more careful next time, and the hero just stares at him in silence for a moment. With his nose bleeding, the protagonist says the puppy almost got hurt, and demands a formal apology. The delinquent starts laughing out loud and points to the hero's nose, which is now bleeding from both sides non-stop. But he quickly shuts up when he remembers his girlfriend is watching and that he needs to maintain his good guy image in front of her. So he changes his attitude and asks if the young man is okay, suggesting he go to the nurse's office as soon as possible. But the young man repeats that the pet is what's important and that the aggressor should be more careful the next time he kicks the ball. He then states that everything is fine because the other guy apologized, and the bully is left completely confused by that calm reaction. So the hero leaves, and one of the bullies comments that he took the kick well, but the boss tells him to shut up. Angrily, the leader tells his henchmen to find out who the new guy is, because he has developed a deadly hatred for that young man. Walking down the street, the young man thinks about the scare he had, but is happy to have found his puppy. He also smiles because, thanks to the pet, he got to see a school and watch people his age having fun. With a smile, the young man wonders if he would have made many friends if he had studied in a place like that. Suddenly, the aggressor from before calls him friend, and the hero turns around, not understanding the approach. Then the bully puts his arm around him and apologizes for what happened on the field earlier with the ball. The redhead says they're in the same grade, so now they're friends, and the protagonist is very confused by this. At this, the aggressor offers to buy him a snack as an apology, and the young man doesn't understand what he means. But upon hearing the word bread, the hero's eyes light up, as he has never eaten anything like it in his entire life. He asks if he's serious, and the bully takes him, saying he knows a place with delicious bread nearby. Then the young man asks if there will be anything for Fry to eat, and the aggressor promises to buy whatever he wants. The redhead thinks the young man must have been hungry from trying to look cool in front of the girls earlier. Suddenly, the bully sticks his foot out in front of the hero, intending to trip him to the ground. With that, the young man trips and falls hard while the aggressor just watches the scene with a cruel look. On the ground, he sees other guys and realizes he's fallen into a trap while protecting the small animal. One of the henchmen then mocks him for falling for the free snack story so easily. The other bullies wonder if the new guy is a bit foolish for believing the story about the bread. The boss says he's going to feed him a knuckle sandwich, and we see several other students lying beaten there. Surrounded on all sides, the protagonist faces the gang, and the leader insults him for being a pathetic weakling. The gang leader gets annoyed and asks why the new guy is starting trouble with him there. Calmly, the The young man asks what he means, and the aggressor yells that he was hitting on his girlfriend. With that, the bully threatens him, saying that a guy like him would cry with just one good punch. The other delinquents mock the hero, and the gang leader insults him for bringing a dog to school. The protagonist covers his face and thinks he was invited to be friends, but it was actually just a fight. He then apologizes for the trouble and tries to leave, but the redhead prepares to attack him from behind. At this, the henchmen block his path and mock his attempt to escape the ambush. With a serious look, the young man tells them to get out of the way because they're scaring his little pet. One of the aggressors gets annoyed by his attitude and lunges at the young man to teach him a lesson right now. But the hero retaliates with a well-aimed punch that lands squarely on the enemy's chin, knocking him out instantly. The delinquent falls unconscious to the ground, and the others are shocked to see the mysterious boy's strength. The gang leader's face turns pale, and he can't believe what just happened right in front of him. Furious, the other henchmen advance together to try and surround and attack the protagonist at the same time. They wonder how the new guy managed to take down their friend with just one swift and precise blow. But the young man just stares at them with his cold eyes and prepares for the fight that's about to begin. At that moment, his mutant heart pulses with a dark energy, and his power begins to awaken. Then the young man dodges their attacks and hits his enemies with superhuman speed and strength. Without giving the aggressors a chance, he continues to deliver precise blows and knocks them down one by one. With a final punch, he hits the leader's face, who can't even react in time to defend himself. Then the hero ends the fight by throwing the gang leader over his shoulder with immense force. With a single blow, the hero smashes the aggressor's head into the brick wall, which cracks from the force of the impact. He then warns them that he told them to stop because little Fry was getting very scared of all the commotion. The other students watching from a distance are terrified to see the damage the new guy caused to the wall. With that, they scream that the young man is a monster and run away, afraid of his superhuman and bizarre strength. The delinquent on the ground looks at the wall and can't believe it's cracking from the force of the punch. Terrified, the bully realizes he's in trouble and thinks that a single blow from that guy would break all his bones. He then understands that he messed with the wrong person, and his face contorts with pure fear and desperation at that moment. Desperate, the redhead bows on the ground and begs for forgiveness, promising he'll never start trouble again. He then tries to get out of it by showing a picture of his own puppy to prove he also loves animals and didn't want to hurt the pet. The hero looks thoughtful, and the aggressor begs to be forgiven, while the young man seems to consider the flimsy excuse. The delinquent continues to show his phone, and the whole scene seems very strange, with the bully suddenly trying to be friendly. Suddenly, the young man's stomach rumbles, and he says he used a bit of strength and is now very hungry because of it. The redhead is completely confused and wonders why the new guy is thinking about food at a time like this. At this, the aggressor believes the young man is a clever guy who is subtly asking for food in exchange for his forgiveness. The scene then changes to his friend in the classroom. Moments later, they arrive at the school's convenience store to finally buy the hero's promised snack. With the table full of food, the protagonist gives thanks and prepares for the feast, while the other just watches from a distance. The young man starts to devour everything eagerly, and the bully watches from afar, still trying to understand the whole situation. He even shares a bit of his bread with little Fry, who barks happily and seems to like the strawberry filling of the snack. With that, the redhead becomes confused because the young man seems strong but acts like a fool, and he can't understand his personality. The aggressor remembers the young man sent one of his guys flying with just one punch, and wonders if he's an athlete. But he dismisses the idea because not even a professional fighter could crack a wall with someone's head. Because of this, he decides he needs to take drastic measures and calls his boss, asking for help with the situation. In an underground casino, the so-called boss answers the call and asks what his subordinate wants with him right now. Desperate, the redhead begs for help and says he's in a very complicated situation and needs backup. On the other end of the line, the man complains that he's only sought after when someone gets beaten up and calls him useless for it. Then the young man begs once more and asks him to save his reputation just this once, so he won't be embarrassed. The boss agrees to help and tells his friends that one of his henchmen got beaten up by a new kid at school. He scoffs at the situation but says he's bored and will stop by to see what's happening. The bully is relieved and thanks him, promising he'll have the target ready for when the backup arrives. With a malicious smile, the redhead hangs up the phone and swears the transfer student will regret ever being born. Suddenly, the hero offers one of his snacks to the aggressor, who is surprised by the young man's unexpected gesture. The young man says he feels bad eating everything by himself, and the other refuses the offer, saying he can have it all. With that, the bully hands all the snacks to him and says he can keep the drinks and everything else he bought. The young man is happy and shares the food with his puppy, while the redhead wonders how someone so strong can be so naive. He watches the young man feeding his pet and notices something strange on his hand, which seems suddenly healed. Then the aggressor remembers he punched the wall, but now his hand is perfectly fine, as if nothing had happened. He starts connecting the dots and realizes the young man has superhuman strength and very fast regeneration. Remembering a video, the redhead recalls that heart mutants can have different abilities depending on their form. Suddenly, he's startled by the possibility and asks if the young man is a mutant, but the puppy ends up throwing up everything. The protagonist panics and denies the accusation, but the aggressor is sure that he's a real mutant. With that, the bully is shocked, as this is the first time he's seen a being like that in real life, and he looks normal. He then remembers that heart mutants are dangerous and becomes afraid of what might happen to him now. The redhead thinks his boss will get beaten up for nothing if he comes to the school, and the man yells from the other end of the line. On the phone, he warns his subordinate that the young man next to him is a very dangerous and powerful mutant. The aggressor says the situation is serious and that they should call off the plan, but the boss has another idea in mind. So the man tells him to hold the target no matter what, because a mutant is too valuable to be left behind. The young man finishes eating and says he's leaving, but the bully needs to keep him there until the backup arrives. With that, the redhead panics and asks why he's leaving already when there's still time before the break is over. The hero smiles and explains that he needs to go home, making the aggressor even more nervous about the situation. Desperate, the bully needs a plan to stall the young man and prevent him from leaving before the right time. So he suggests they skip class to have some fun outside of school, and the protagonist is curious about the proposal. They arrive at an arcade, and the hero is amazed by the lights and sounds of such a different place. The young man walks around the place, and the bully realizes it's the young man's first time in a place like this. With his eyes sparkling, the protagonist says he didn't know places like this existed, and the redhead is shocked by the revelation. He observes everything with great attention and is impressed by every detail of this new technological world. Suddenly, the hero sees a claw machine and recognizes the plush toy his friend has on her backpack. The aggressor is in disbelief and wonders what the young man has been doing with his life to have never seen a claw machine. So he offers to pay for a game, and the young man gets excited about the chance to try and get the toy. With the bully's help, the protagonist controls the claw and is amazed to see the mechanism moving to grab the plushie. With a perfect move, the young man manages to grab the plush toy and celebrates his achievement with a shout of joy. He then hugs the toy, happy to have gotten the same one his friend has on her backpack. The bully watches it all and thinks that stalling the young man until the boss arrives won't be a problem at all. He then points to a karaoke place and asks if the hero has ever been to a place like that in his life. The two sit down, and the aggressor explains that there they can sing their favorite songs and have a lot of fun. The young man feels awkward and confesses that he doesn't know any songs, leaving the other quite surprised by the revelation. With that, he begins to sing a lullaby about a picnic and cotton candy that his mother taught him. The redhead gets annoyed and asks why he's singing a children's song in a place like that. But the young man explains that it's the only song he knows because he was separated from his family when he was a child. He reveals that he hasn't had a normal life since then and therefore never had time to learn other songs. The bully is shocked by the story and starts to feel bad about the young man's sad past, who seems so alone. He wonders if heart mutants are always so different and begins to change his opinion about the young man. With a pitiful expression, the aggressor feels his heartache and realizes he's getting attached to the mysterious boy. He then offers the hero money and says he's going to show him a whole new world starting right now. Suddenly, the two start playing a drum game with great energy, and the redhead shouts for him to hit it faster. In another fighting game, the protagonist uses his foot to play, and the bully complains that he's using dirty tricks. but in a dancing game, the hero gets all clumsy and ends up falling on the floor with the puppy in his arms. The aggressor laughs at his friend's clumsiness, and the two have fun together, passing the time in the lively arcade. Outside, the two are breathing heavily, and the redhead comments that they played like crazy in there. The protagonist agrees and says it was the first time he'd had so much fun, and the bully happily drinks some water. At this, the redhead notices something strange and stops everything he's doing while gripping his water bottle tightly. With a nervous smile, he looks at his phone and wonders who could be calling him at such an inconvenient time. But when he answers the phone, he gets an earful from his boss, who yells at him to answer the call faster next time. Then the delinquent remembers that he was supposed to be holding the young man for his master to teach him a lesson right now. At that moment, the young man looks at the pictures they took together and realizes he acted like a complete idiot during their outing. He sees the picture of the two of them making funny poses and notices that he ended up forming a real bond with his target. Meanwhile, the protagonist continues to play with his little pet, unaware of the betrayal being planned. The scene shifts to the dark alley where the gang of criminals impatiently awaits the arrival of the young mutant with his pet. With great fear, the redhead bows before the leader and apologizes 1,000 times for failing his mission earlier today. But the master gets furious and asks if the subordinate is trying to mess with him in this sinister place. At this, the aggressor starts to sweat and thinks his change of heart isn't just because of his new human friend. He looks at the hero sitting with the puppy and understands that this little creature is the only family the young man has in his life. With his face in his hands, the delinquent feels terrible and says that this whole situation is just too sad for him. Then the man shows a picture of his own little animal and says he perfectly understands the pain of losing a faithful companion. Crying hard, the young man sits next to the protagonist and regrets almost letting his friends hurt the little dog. At that moment, he gets it into his head that he needs to protect the pet from any danger that might arise right now. With that, the young man decides to face his gang, but soon realizes that the leader has completely lost his patience with him. Suddenly, the boss lands a brutal punch on the redhead's face, who is thrown to the side with the extreme force of the blow. Lying on the ground, the subordinate trembles in pain as the villain approaches to continue the cowardly assault against him. Finally, the man grabs the traitor by the hair and yells Taigu's name, making it clear that his punishment has only just begun. The boss pulls the redhead's hair and asks with great anger where the mutant is hiding now. With that, he remembers how much fun he had with the boy at the arcade and realizes his friend is just a normal kid. At this, the other henchmen surround the young man with bats and iron pipes, ready to do something very malicious. At that moment, the masked criminals observe the scene with cold stares as they await orders from the gang's leader. Then the brute asks if the subordinate thinks the whole gang gathered there just to waste time with lies. But Taigu desperately pleads, stating that it's all just a big misunderstanding about the target they're looking for. He remembers the young man passed out from exhaustion after playing just 2 games and seemed like a common loser. With a bleeding face, the delinquent insists the hero is just trash and apologizes for the villain having come all this way. Just then, the leader scratches his head suspiciously and asks if the redhead is really claiming the boy isn't there. With that, the aggressor puts a fake arm around the young man and asks if he's upset about getting a few slaps from his big brother. Then the man lights a cigarette and says that the subordinate's face gives away all the lies he's trying to tell now. At this, the villain demands to know the real reason the delinquent is suddenly changing his story about the mutant's whereabouts. The young man sweats, thinking that the hero isn't human, and knowing how much the world hates these different beings. With that, the boss starts laughing loudly and asks if the boy was really worried about his safety at that moment. But the redhead remains silent, as he realizes the situation is getting more and more dangerous for him. Unexpectedly, the villain raises his hand and offers 5 million as a reward if he hands over the target right now. With a cruel smile, he reveals that he even has a buyer ready to take the boy to the lab without a trace. The delinquent is in total shock and wonders if what his master is doing isn't actual human trafficking. He recalls the news on his phone about mutants being sold to the government and realizes it's all real and cruel. At that moment, his hand starts to tremble on the ground, and he understands that his superior is a much worse monster than he ever imagined. Even on the ground, the redhead tries to insist that the hero is nothing special, but the boss doesn't believe him at all. With that, the villain loses his patience and lands a powerful kick right in the subordinate's stomach, who didn't see it coming. The impact is so strong that the young man flies and crashes into a wall with brutal and unexpected violence. Lying on the ground, he's in a lot of pain and can barely breathe after that powerful blow that knocked the wind out of him. Furious, the leader complains that he's let a lot of things slide, but now his patience has finally run out for good. He then stomps on the delinquent's head with all his might and calls him frustrating for lying to him. At this, the man orders his henchmen to beat the traitor until he finally tells the whole truth about the mutant. The other aggressors obey and start kicking the young man's body without any mercy in that moment of fury. The young man tries to protect himself, but the blows are many and hit his entire body without stopping for a second. He then remembers the past and when he was just a child being beaten up by other school bullies. Back then, the little boy begged them to stop, but they continued with their cruel and cowardly assaults. Suddenly, his future boss appears and asks why those new kids were beating up a friend of his like that. Scared, the aggressors flee, and the man tells the young man to come with them because he's part of the gang now. The little boy looks at him with admiration, and the leader calls him by name, asking if he was okay after everything. In another memory, the man teaches him how to fight and says he's his older brother from now on in that family. He used to think his master was loyal, a good fighter, and that he never left anyone behind back then. But back in the present, the redhead continues to get beaten, and his admiration for the boss seems to have completely vanished. The delinquent recalls that he wanted to be like his older brothers because they seemed so cool and strong before. The villain wonders if the young man doesn't know anything, and says he can see the lie in his eyes from a mile away. Then the leader stares at him and says the young man has loyalty, and that's pretty cool of him in the end. Even all beaten up, the redhead tries to insist the hero isn't worth anything, and asks the boss to believe him. But the leader explains that selling the target on his own would only get him a few bucks, and that he's not smart. The man says loyalty is worthless if his body gets destroyed, and asks a henchman to bring a chain. With the chain in his hand, he reminds the young man that his dream was to live a cool and stylish life with his friends. Then the villain states that making a lot of money without feeling ashamed is the coolest way to live in this world. With a malicious smile, he says the two of them can live cool lives together if the young man cooperates with the plan. But the delinquent calls him boss and apologizes, but his expression shows he's made an important decision. With that, the young man states that his master isn't being cool at all, and faces him with a look of pure disappointment and sadness. He himself is surprised by what he said, and wonders why he's saying these things to such a dangerous man. At this, the boss's expression changes completely, and he understands that his subordinate really has betrayed him for the boy. Terrified, the redhead tries to apologize and says he said it all without thinking, but the villain doesn't seem to want to hear any more. With a hateful glare, the leader tells the traitor to perish and prepares to land a fatal blow with his chained hand. But suddenly, a hand appears and grabs the aggressor's fist with incredible strength, stopping his devastating attack. The boss is shocked and notices the chain is thick and full of welding marks, making it a dangerous weapon. He knows a blow from that would leave a huge scar and sees the hero holding his arm effortlessly. The other henchmen are completely confused and wonder who this new guy is who appeared out of nowhere to ruin everything. With his face all bruised, the redhead asks how his friend managed to find him in that hidden and dangerous alley. Then the protagonist explains that he came looking for him because he wasn't coming home and he got very worried about him. With tears in his eyes, the injured young man yells for his friend to run because these people are dangerous acquaintances of his. But the young man reveals that he was actually the one who called the gang to teach Gio a lesson, and feels very guilty. The redhead continues, revealing that he also told them Gio was a mutant, and the hero wonders why. With his face all bruised, he grinds his teeth in pain and regret for having betrayed his new friend. He then confesses that he did it all because he was angry about getting beaten up by the young man earlier at school. But the protagonist says that's not why, and asks why his friend is getting beaten with that heavy chain. The gang leader watches the scene with a malicious look and seems to be enjoying all the confusion. At this, the delinquent is in total shock and can't believe the young man is worried about him. Suddenly, one of the henchmen takes advantage of the distraction and tries to hit the hero in the head with a baseball bat. The masked aggressor seems determined to finish the boy off and uses all his strength in that cowardly attack. With a furious glare, the protagonist shows he won't let that aggression slide and prepares for combat. Then all the other delinquents advance and start hitting the young man with various different weapons at the same time. The blows hit the young man's body with great force, but he protects himself to avoid serious injury to his head. Seeing his owner getting beaten, Little Fry barks with all his might, trying to scare the aggressors and protect his friend. The redhead is terrified by the scene and realizes the hero is being punished because of his betrayal and his lie. The henchman with the bat then understands everything and yells that this boy is the heart mutant they were looking for. Red liquid drips from the hero's hand, which is injured after so many blows, and he touches the ground with his fingers. At that moment, his power begins to awaken, and the red liquid on the ground reacts to the touch of his powerful, mutant skin. The aggressor is confused and doesn't understand what's happening as the young man's body begins to regenerate. Suddenly, the protagonist gets up and lands a devastating punch right on the enemy's face, who has no time to react. With incredible speed, he starts to dodge and counterattack all the delinquents with swift and precise blows. In just a few seconds, one of the men is already on the ground, and the others are terrified by the young man's superhuman strength. The henchmen face the protagonist and prepare for combat as the young man slowly approaches. With his head down, he walks toward the danger, and his dark aura makes all the enemies very tense. Furious, the gang leader yells for his men to finish off the intruder once and for all, right there. With that, all the delinquents surround the hero with their bats and prepare for a mass attack. Then the aggressors advance together and start swinging their weapons at the young man. But he dodges everything, and one of the men ends up being thrown by a powerful and accurate kick. In just a few seconds, several henchmen are already on the ground with serious injuries all over their bodies. The young man continues to fight and lands a devastating punch on the face of yet another enemy, who flies far away. Without giving the other a chance to react, he follows up with a kick and finishes the aggressor with a fatal blow. With a cold stare, the protagonist shows he will have no mercy for those who attacked him. At this, one of the masked men tries to hit the young man with a baseball bat, but he's fast. The hero narrowly dodges the attack, and red liquid flies, indicating the blow was a close call. He then uses the enemy's momentum to counterattack and retaliates with an even stronger and more precise blow. The aggressor is thrown with brutal force and crashes into the wall, getting knocked out instantly. The others are terrified and wonder why the new guy is so strong, and if he's even human. At that moment, the young man grabs another enemy by the collar and stares at him with eyes full of hatred. Desperate, the boss pulls out a sharp object and tells the others to do the same to finish off the young man. Then the villain runs and hits the protagonist with a cowardly, cheap shot right in his side. With a cruel smile, the man asks if it hurt and mocks the young man's injury, who feels the impact. The hero coughs a little, and red liquid trickles from his mouth, indicating the attack was much more serious than it seemed. The villain then freaks out and starts striking the hero repeatedly, yelling for the monster to just be gone already. But the young man grabs the blade with his hand, and red liquid drips, indicating the strength of his grip. With that, the gang leader is completely confused and can't understand what's happening. The protagonist stands up and with a cold voice tells the aggressor to stop trying to pierce him like that. He then pulls the object out of his own chest and holds it firmly, leaving his enemy unarmed. Terrified, the man asks what kind of heart he has to withstand such an injury and still be alive. The young man stares at the aggressor and asks if he's curious about his true, powerful mutant nature. Without answering, the hero returns the blow, striking the villain's leg, who screams in pain from the surprise attack. Seeing the scene, the other henchmen panic and realize they shouldn't have messed with a mutant. With that, the young man throws the makeshift weapon to the ground and prepares to finish off the remaining enemies. His eyes glow with an intense red light, and he lunges at the fugitives with absurd speed. He then warns them that now that they know his identity, none of them will escape this place alive. His hateful expression makes it clear that he will have no mercy for those who hurt his new friend. Meanwhile, Little Fry barks happily as if he's cheering for his owner to finish off all the villains. In a few seconds, all the henchmen are on the ground, their faces completely disfigured by the blows. The protagonist stands in the middle of the alley with all the defeated enemies and his puppy by his side. On the ground, the redhead calls his friend's name, still shocked by the display of power he just witnessed. He then asks if the hero is okay and offers to call an ambulance because of the serious injury. But the young man says he's perfectly fine and touches his chest to show there's no longer any wound there. In shock, his friend realizes the hole is gone and is left speechless by the young man's incredible regeneration. With a bleeding nose, the redhead stares at his friend, in total shock at his regeneration power. He then looks away, his expression filled with guilt for betraying the only friend he's ever had. Amidst the defeated enemies, the protagonist apologizes, leaving the delinquent even more confused by everything. Suddenly, the young man clenches his fist tightly and seems to be controlling himself to keep from exploding with anger. On the ground, the young man hits his own head and curses himself for being an idiot and choosing the wrong friends. The hero is surprised and asks if his friend was really trying to sell a friend like that. With his face to the ground, the delinquent asks for forgiveness and confesses that he betrayed him because he was close to those bad guys. He explains that he thought it was cool to hang out with the gang and that deep down he's just a thug like them. But the protagonist approaches and extends a kind of white cloth to the young man, who doesn't understand the gesture. The hero says his nose is bleeding and tells him to use it to clean his face right away. The redhead asks if it's really for him to use, and his friend just confirms with a simple, calm gesture. But upon taking the object, the delinquent realizes it's a puppy training pad and is shocked. Even so, he decides to use it to clean his face and says he doesn't deserve to be treated like a real friend. With a smile, the young man says that means he wasn't the only one who saw them as friends, and that's enough for him. His friend is left speechless by the young man's kindness and stares at him with eyes full of pure admiration. At that moment, tears start to stream down, and the redhead can no longer hold back all the emotion he feels. He then gets up and hugs the protagonist tightly while crying and apologizing for everything he's done. In the midst of the chaos, the young man says that Gio is a really cool guy, and the two finally make peace. Just then, the redhead's boss appears and tells him to let the protagonist go, saying he's thought about his mistakes. He and his entire gang are tied up and kneeling, promising not to reveal the hero's mutant identity. The redhead watches the scene with a very confused and irritated look, not understanding what's happening. Then, he gets furious and kicks the boss in the face, while yelling at him to apologize properly. The tough guy tells Gio that the man is scum and continues to attack the big guy relentlessly. With that, the boss feels the full force of the brutal kick that lands squarely on his face. The attacker yells for the man to leave for good, while the protagonist calmly watches everything. At this, the redhead asks what they should do with those guys and suggests teaching them a lesson. But the tough guy is surprised when the protagonist starts to walk away from the scene without a word. The big man clasps his hands and begs them not to call the police, promising he won't say anything. But our hero ignores the plea and calls out to some officers who are passing by on the street at that moment. Two police officers approach and say they received a report of a disturbance in the area. Seeing the police, the boss's gang gets completely terrified and doesn't know how to react to the situation. The tough guy quickly approaches the officers, saying he was just about to call them for help. He then points to the group and accuses them of being criminals who are in the business of selling people. And he adds that if the police check their head out, they will find plenty of proof of their crimes. The redhead yells that they are all adults and real criminals, asking the officers to arrest them. At this, the boss despairs and lets out a loud scream as his plan goes down the drain. Then the villain throws himself on the ground and starts pretending to be hurt to try and fool the police. He claims his bones are broken and that the hero even hurt him, making the redhead angry. The man points to the protagonist and says he was the one responsible for beating them all up. The tough guy can't believe the audacity and yells that they were the ones who tried to capture the young man, and he even asks if they were talking about taking the innocent, looking young man apart. The boss yells for the police to look at the protagonist, saying he's fine and has no injuries. At this, his henchmen also start acting, pretending they are hurt and are the victims. The officers ask everyone to calm down, saying they can explain everything at the station. but the big man points to the hero again and yells that he is a heart mutant. The protagonist is completely shocked by the accusation and doesn't know what to do in that moment. The officers look at each other with serious faces, and the man asks if there isn't a special law for them. With that, the police turn to the young man, asking if he is indeed a mutant and requesting his documents. The protagonist says he doesn't have any kind of documents, and his face shows nervousness. The officers stare at him and ask if he's an unregistered mutant, as that's against the law. With that, an officer says he will start the registration and asks for his ID and what his ability is. At that moment, the young man totally panics because he can't reveal his true identity. He remembers he had just stopped being a skeleton and that it would be harder for them to track him now. The young man thinks that if he's registered, the guys from the lab will find him, and the officer insists. Unexpectedly, a girl runs toward them and yells for them to wait a second. The young woman arrives out of breath and greets the officers with a tired smile on her face. The officers are confused by the sudden arrival and ask who she is. Then she shows her cell phone with a call and asks one of the officers to answer it. The officer takes the device and answers the call, a little suspicious of the situation. On the other side is Hi Jang's sister, a superintendent of the Special Mutant Task Force. The officer is shocked and salutes, introducing himself as Sergeant Han-Sup Jin. The woman explains that the case is an attempted kidnapping, and the mutant is a witness. Then she takes responsibility, and the sergeant yells that he will follow her orders. The sergeant orders his partners to arrest only the gang and release the other two. The police start arresting the boss, who protests and asks why only they are being taken. He continues complaining while being handcuffed and asks who the person on the phone was. The girl waves with a smile, and the boss wonders who the heck that young lady is. The protagonist asks the young lady how she knew he was in that place. She explains that she saw him at school and then surrounded by strange guys, so she decided to follow them. The redhead is confused, and the hero points to him, asking if he's the strange guy, and she confirms. The girl asks what happened to the redhead's face, because it looks bad, and the young man explains. She finds the tough guy strange, but remembers he's a good kid and notices his look. The girl says her sister took care of the guys, and the redhead cries because the hero has friends, and he doesn't. The protagonist turns to the boss and asks who he was planning to hand him over to. With a dark look, he questions if it was for the Herms research lab. The man denies knowing the lab and says he would hand him over to a local dealer. Inside the patrol car, the boss explains that there are dealers who trade in mutants. With a determined look, our hero states that he wants to find these dealers. The scene changes to the police station, where we see the gang boss being interrogated by the authorities. Back with the young people, the girl yells that there's no way he can do something like that. The redhead agrees, saying it's very dangerous because there are many bad guys among the dealers. The young lady also warns that her sister said they target mutants and are terrifying. With a determined smile, the protagonist affirms that now he wants to find them even more. The girl then asks why he's so desperate to find one of these dealers. The hero thoughtfully touches his own face and says he was wondering something. He then reveals that maybe he can find his old friends through these guys. The tough guy gets annoyed and yells at him, asking why he didn't say he had friends. But the young man explains they weren't friends from the outside, but companions who lived in the lab. He says that life inside was full of painful experiments and suffering every day. One day, he was dragged to an unknown place and was terrified by the long journey. He could only think about how painful the next test would be as they pushed him into a room. The place they took him to was completely filled with knives on all sides. Suddenly, the knives started flying on their own across the room at an absurd speed. Terrified, he thought he would be pierced multiple times in that terrible place. The guards behind him were scary and ordered him to get into the room quickly. With no other choice, the boy obeyed, and the door closed, trapping him inside. But to his surprise, The room was full of other young people who were also mutants. He was shocked to realize he wasn't alone in that bizarre and strange test. At that moment, a hand managed to stop one of the knives coming toward him. Another boy was preparing to attack the skeleton with a very sharp weapon, but his attack was stopped by an unknown energy that appeared out of nowhere in front of him. The protagonist was enveloped in ice that protected him from the unexpected blow. The boy who attacked was on the ground, annoyed that his attack had been stopped that way. He then saw that a girl had used her ice powers to save him. The young woman argues with the other boy, who calls him a monster for being a skeleton, but she scolds him and tells him to look at his lab coat, as he's an experiment, just like everyone else there. The skeleton was very confused by the whole unexpected and different situation. With that, all the other children approached, curious to see the living skeleton up close. The skeleton shrinks in shame, asking them not to look at his face, which he thinks is ugly. The other young mutants watch him with curiosity, without showing fear or disgust. One of them says he looks normal, and that his appearance is just because he's a mutant. The boy asks if he's okay, and if it's his first time in that training class. With that, all the young people start introducing themselves one by one in a very friendly way. That's how he met his first friends, and they ask him what his name is. Back in the present, he explains that the place gathered children from various labs. That's why they became friends quickly, even with few classes and not seeing each other often. The protagonist stops eating for a moment and looks up, thinking about the past. The redhead and the girl cry, moved by the sad story of his life in the lab. The young lady then asks where his friends are now, and the young man remains silent. He reveals that on the day they escaped together, they ended up getting separated during the escape. At this, the girl understands he wants to find the dealer to find his friends. Moved, the young lady and the tough guy promise to help in any way they can in his search. The redhead remembers he took the boss's cell phone and says the dealer's contact is in there. He shows the meeting time, and the protagonist is startled because it will be soon. The scene changes to a warehouse where a scream of pain echoes through the place at dusk. Several men run with weapons, yelling for everyone to grab something and attack a target, but a hooded figure dodges the attacks with impressive speed. The mysterious person stops one of the blades with their bare hand, breaking its tip. Holding the blade, he shows how to properly handle a weapon of that type. He says that way it doesn't cut right, and attacks the men with devastating speed. In the blink of an eye, all the henchmen are on the ground, defeated and motionless. One of the survivors realizes he can't beat him with knives and pulls out a gun. The henchman then points the gun in the direction of the hooded figure and prepares to fire. The mysterious figure is standing with a sword and seems unconcerned by the threat. This is Chay One, who says his blade can cut through even the toughest steel. His mutant heart is the blade heart, which gives him this incredible ability. Another hooded figure tries to flee the scene, running among the fallen bodies. But before he can escape, an attack hits him in the head, knocking him down instantly. With that, the fugitive falls face first to the ground and remains motionless after the precise attack. Chay One tells him to try to do better next time while observing the scene. Meanwhile, another friend of theirs with sharp claws also shows off all his power. Back in the present, the protagonist arrives at the alley that the gang boss indicated. He looks around and notices the place is quite remote and perfect for a secret meeting. The young man confirms that this is the meeting place and prepares for what's to come. Looking at the cell phone, he sees there are still 30 minutes until the dealer arrives. He thinks about the dealer who sells mutants, and that maybe he's one of them too. In a flashback, the girl asks if he's really going to meet with this dealer. She warns him that they are criminals who hunt mutants, and some are mutants themselves. But the young man sees this as a chance to find out more about his missing friends. Even though she's worried, he calms her down, saying that for today, he'll just watch from a distance. He assures her that with his ability, he can easily escape if something goes wrong at the meeting. Now in the alley, he thinks that if necessary, he should capture the dealer at once. For that, he looks for something he can use in an ambush and finds a wrench. He knows he can't attack without thinking, and that the most important thing is to figure out the ability. Unexpectedly, several knives fly in his direction in a swift surprise attack. The young man is thrown back and cries out in pain from being caught off guard by the attack. Lying on the ground, he sees one of the knives stuck right next to his frightened face. A hooded figure appears and calls him a rat for hiding in an alley like that. The mysterious man approaches and asks if the young man there is an undercover cop. The protagonist understands that this guy must be the dealer he was waiting for. Seeing the knife, he wonders if the man is just a normal human without powers. Thinking it will be easier to capture him, he prepares to attack with all his strength. With that, he leans on a concrete block, ready for the fight to come. In a swift movement, he runs toward the dealer for a direct attack. He gets close to throw a punch, giving the enemy no time to react to his blow. But upon seeing the man's face, his expression changes completely, and he's in shock. The dealer reveals his identity and introduces himself as Chay One, his friend from the lab. The protagonist is speechless and repeats his friend's name in total disbelief. The young man wonders how the other one knows his name, as his former friend prepares to attack. Without hesitation, the dealer lunges forward and lands a blow that sends our hero flying. With the impact, the protagonist is thrown and lands hard on the alley floor. Lying on the ground, he tries to get up, but feels that something is very wrong with his body. The young man realizes his strength is gone because the swordsman cut all his tendons. With that, he looks at the wounds on his arm and shoulder, which won't stop bleeding. His ankles were also hit, leaving him completely unable to move. He thinks that his friend's skill with the sword is far beyond normal. At that moment, he remembers the day of the escape, when he was still a skeleton in the lab. The ceiling collapsed and blocked the path of all the desperate fugitives. With his body partially regenerated, he used his strength to hold up the rebel and save everyone. Despite the difficulty, his face showed the determination of a true leader. At this, his friend used his blade to cut through the debris and open a new path. Back then, the skeleton looked at him with admiration and gratitude for his help. With a smile, his companion said he would clear the way for everyone to escape. Back in the present, he asks again how his friend knew his name there, but the swordsman just watches him get up from the ground. Looking very confused, the former companion wonders how he's standing and questions if he's a mutant. With that, the protagonist yells that it's him, Kim Ji-io, the skeleton from the lab. Chay One repeats the word, skeleton, still not quite understanding the situation. Then he points and asks if he's the same Kim Ji-io he knew in the lab. The hero smiles, happy to know his friend is alive after being separated for so long. Chay One, still in disbelief, points again and asks if it's really his friend. The protagonist confirms and says he finally managed to regenerate completely. Happily, he walks to hug his friend, but the other one prepares his sharp claws. In a swift move, he attacks again, and the young man is thrown back, confused. The former friend gets into position to attack once more, while the other is on the defensive. Wounded, he wonders why his companion didn't recognize him and attacked him like that. With a cold look, the swordsman says that seeing his wounds heal, he's sure. The hero shows his wounds closing and asks why he's doing this. The swordsman then says that now, he's sure the young man is a real mutant. With a swift movement, he attacks again, but the protagonist narrowly manages to dodge. Even so, the hero is thrown to the ground, shocked by the brutality of the attack. On the ground, he yells at his former friend, asking why he's doing this. With a look of hatred, the swordsman says he should know the answer better than anyone. With that, our hero decides to fight back and runs to land a punch on his companion, but the attacker is too fast, and the young man ends up getting hit by several cuts. Even wounded, he doesn't give up and continues with his fist clenched, ready for the fight. Red liquid spreads on the ground, showing the severity of the young man's injuries. He braces for the next attack as the swordsman advances with his blade, but the attack pierces his hand, and he feels terrible pain from the sword's blow. The young man manages to stop the blade with his bare hand, leaving his former friend surprised. The swordsman asks if he really thinks a punch will work against his sword. The protagonist faces him and says he knows exactly how good he is with a blade. At that moment, the former companion is completely shocked by the young man's statement. Then he seizes the chance and grabs the swordsman's arm with great force. The attacker is confused by the young man's strength as he holds his wrist, preventing him from attacking. With a quick move, he twists the enemy's arm, disarming him in an incredible way. The former friend's expression changes to pure shock upon seeing the hero's fighting skill. With a clear path, he lands a powerful punch that sends the swordsman flying. The impact of the blow kicks up dust and shows the absurd strength of the young mutant. Lying on the ground, the attacker admits he's not as bad as he seemed before. Then he asks why the protagonist ran away if he could fight like that. The hero is confused by the question and repeats that he doesn't remember running away. The former friend confirms and says it was on the day they were escaping from the lab. In a flashback, we see the guards shooting at the young people, trying to escape to freedom. Chay One yells his friend's name, asking him to grab a nearby steel pipe. But the skeleton was just standing there, surrounded, as his friends were defeated one by one. The former companion accuses him, saying that at that moment, he simply ran away alone. He claims the skeleton ran and left all his friends behind that day. The protagonist is shocked by the accusation and tries to justify the past. He says he had no choice, and that if he had stayed, everyone would have been lost that day. But the swordsman doesn't believe him and calls him a coward while leaning on an iron pillar. With that, he shows his absurd strength by crushing the metal pillar with just one hand. The structure becomes completely deformed and twisted because of his power. Then the former friend states that he knows the hero's regeneration ability very well. He knows that if the young man is taken apart, it will take a long time for him to recover. The young man is then surrounded by several sharp blades that sprout from the ground around him. He tries to protect himself from the attacks, but his clothes get torn and stained with red liquid. With his arms, he blocks one of the blades that pierces his body and says, "No." At that moment, the swordsman says, the real blow will come from somewhere else. Two blades then strike a support pillar, causing a huge impact. The explosion destroys everything around, and people run away, scared by the noise. The girl and the redhead watch in shock, and he suggests calling the police quickly. Everything is covered in dust and destruction, and the young lady worries, calling out for her friend. The hero holds the blade in his chest, and the swordsman notices his healing is faster. Then the protagonist says it's all a misunderstanding, and that he never really ran away. He reveals he stayed behind to fight and protect everyone, and only went there to rescue friends. His former companion stares at him with a serious look and asks if it's really a misunderstanding. He hears a noise nearby and questions if there's another mutant hiding somewhere. With a dark look, the young man says he heard people's voices in that place. He then extends a hand to his former friend, trying to better explain what happened. The swordsman interrupts him and says to go to his hideout if they want to talk. He puts on his hood and says that many things have happened, and there's a lot to tell. The protagonist watches him with a serious and sweaty face, not understanding the change in attitude. Amidst the rebel, he thinks that his friend's personality is completely different. He remembers that in the lab, his companion was a cheerful boy who gave him food. Now, he's a dealer in a hideout, and the hero wonders what happened to him. The scene changes, showing a sharp weapon being held by someone in a dark place. At this, the young man's expression changes to pure terror, and his eyes go wide. But instead of a weapon, what appears in the air are hamburger ingredients, leaving the hero confused. Inside the place, a mysterious cook chops onions with absurd speed and skill. The protagonist and his friends look at the scene, completely shocked by what they're seeing. The cook multiplies and prepares 3 sandwiches at once, leaving everyone very impressed. With that, the result is a perfect hamburger with all ingredients perfectly aligned. The man's hands assemble the sandwich with a care and precision that seem otherworldly. The cook reveals himself to be the old friend, who offers the hamburger with a smile on his face. He then invites everyone to enjoy the new sandwich that has been added to the menu. At that moment, a crowd of fans appears and praises the cook and his delicious food. With the unexpected situation, the protagonist is completely lost and doesn't understand anything. They then realize that the hideout is actually a very famous and busy diner. Inside the bathroom, another acquaintance with pink hair looks at himself in the mirror, very proud. Sitting on a sofa, he reveals that this place is his current job, leaving everyone surprised. The hero asks if he has a job, and the colleague calls him unemployed for not working. The pink-haired guy then questions who the people hiding behind the hero are. He introduces the girl and the redhead as his new friends, who have helped him a lot lately. The lab colleague scoffs at the word friend and the protagonist's unemployment situation. At this, the girl and the redhead get angry and defend the young man, saying he had a tough life, but the young man calms them down and says not to worry, as the swordsman is a good person. Chay One then asks him to continue the story about what happened on the day of the escape. The protagonist explains that at the time, there was a bomb hidden on their escape path. In a flashback, he remembers the moment they were surrounded by the lab guards. His friends were all together and terrified amidst the rubble of the destroyed building. It was at that moment he heard the sound of a time bomb nearby. Having participated in explosion tests before, he recognized the sound of the burning fuse. The scientists planned to blow everything up to trap the young people under the debris. He knew the stronger ones might survive, but the weaker ones wouldn't be so lucky. So he grabbed all the bombs he could and ran as far as he could. With a determined face, he ran as fast as he could to save his companions. Back in the present, he says that after the explosion, he woke up alone in a forest. He says that when he returned, no one was there, so he thought everyone had escaped safely. The swordsman remembers hearing an explosion from a distance on the day of the escape. The friend then asks if he really took the bomb, and the young man confirms he survives explosions. With that, the former companion puts a hand on his face, seemingly not believing the story he heard. The hero says he knows it's hard to believe, but his friend surprisingly says he believes him. Tears stream from his eyes, and he says there were too many bombs to explain at the time. The young man is very confused by the sudden reaction of his former lab companion. Suddenly, the friend picks up a knife with a serious expression, and a red background appears behind him. The hero looks at him with a panicked and surprised face, not understanding the mood swing. But instead of attacking, hamburger ingredients start flying through the air again in the kitchen. The swordsman goes back to chopping onions with incredible skill, without even looking at the board. He then hands a full meal to his friend and says he kind of figured what had happened. The young man is shocked by the food, and the colleague explains it's a gift for everything he went through. While he's eating, two girls approach and ask to take a picture with the diner's manager. The friend agrees and poses for a selfie with one of the fans using a bunny ear filter. After the photo, he turns to the protagonist and apologizes for misjudging him before. He apologizes for attacking without hearing his side of the story, and the young man says it's okay because it didn't hurt. The hero eats the sandwich with his mouth full and says it's delicious and that he's envious of his friend. The cook then offers more food to the young man if he's still hungry. He then points to his name tag, boasts about being the manager of the whole store. The young man says that's amazing and that he seems like a normal person, and the friend says it's nothing. He then says the protagonist can be normal too and offers him a job at the diner. The manager says he can even pay a little extra, leaving the hero and his friends shocked. But the protagonist raises his hand and interrupts the conversation with a very serious expression on his face. The young man accuses him, remembering he was at the meeting point, and asks why he's a dealer. The friend gets furious at the question and calls him a jerk for questioning that after the lab. The hero then realizes that all of this must be just an act from his former companion. The manager scratches his head and confirms that he only pretends to be a mutant dealer. He explains that when he's not at the store, he poses as a dealer to lure in the bad guys, and he finishes by saying it's all a disguise, so he can take down all the kidnappers. The hero asks if that's serious, and the friend confirms that it's obviously a disguise. With that, the young man is relieved, as he was genuinely worried about his companion. He then asks if the manager works there, and pretends to be a dealer in his spare time. With a smile and a thumbs up, the protagonist says his colleague's attitude is amazing. The young man praises his former companion for living well, and the man gets a bit embarrassed. With his mouth full, he offers to help with anything, leaving the other surprised. He remembers that his main goal is to find the other friends, and that he would help in any way. The manager looks at him with a serious and thoughtful expression regarding the offer of help. With a punch to the table, he yells that of course he needs help with his plan. The swordsman says there's a dealer to catch, and with his friend's ability, it will be easy. And he adds that if they catch the guys, they might get information about the others. The former companion points to the young man and says he will be a great help on the mission. With a fist bump, they seal the deal, and the manager says he'll look for him if he needs backup. He then says goodbye to get back to work and says he'll call with the detailed plan later. Outside, the young man thanks his friends for waiting and for being able to talk to his colleague. The suspicious redhead asks if he's sure he can trust his friend after so long. The girl also shows concern, as she was shocked to hear he was a dealer. But the protagonist smiles and says it's okay, and that he completely trusts his friend. In a memory, he sees his colleague smiling like a child and says he hasn't changed at all. The young lady then asks how the manager will contact him if he doesn't have a cell phone. With a smile, he shows the bad guy's cell phone and says he has a device to use. The scene changes to a dark alley where a young man runs desperately from his pursuers. Several men chase him, yelling not to let him escape the area at any cost. The wounded and tired young man is cornered by the bad guys who chase him into a dead-end alley. Angrily, he yells for them to stop following him, and his hand begins to produce a golden liquid. The mysterious liquid drips from his hand and spreads across the floor of the dark alley. With that, the pursuers slip and fall to the ground when they step on the oil-like substance. The young fugitive smiles in relief, thinking he finally managed to escape with his life that time. But before he could celebrate, a powerful punch lands squarely on his face. Lying on the ground, he sees a dark figure who asks where he thinks he's going. The young man on the ground begs for his life and says his power is useless and only good for spitting oil. At this, the gang leader grabs him by the hair and calls him pathetic for having such a weak power. One of the henchmen comments that not every mutant is strong, and some are like normal people. With a wicked smile, the leader says this is easy money, and they'll get $1 billion for him. The young mutant then lets out a scream of pure terror and despair at the situation. Unexpectedly, a figure appears and asks if that's all they're getting for the job. All the bad guys turn around confused and wonder who the guy is that appeared out of nowhere. Suddenly, the gang leader is hit by a devastating blow that goes right through him. The hero's friend holds the blade and says they should charge more for risking their lives. The henchmen realize he's a mutant and advance to attack while he counts about 10 enemies. The swordsman then decides it's better to end this very quickly. In the blink of an eye, all the bad guys who attacked him are defeated and fall to the ground. He moves with absurd speed and takes down another enemy with a precise blow. The leader yells for his men to grab their weapons and points one in the direction of the hooded figure. At this, the pink-haired young man just places his finger on the bad guy's gun without fear. He then reminds the man that his weapons are also made of steel and prepares to attack. At this, his blade is shown with several sharp swords around him. The boss's weapon begins to tremble and twist in a very strange way. The metal of the object starts to bend and change shape in his hands. The man is completely shocked and doesn't understand what's happening to his weapon. From inside the barrel, several sharp blades begin to sprout and grow rapidly. With that, the spikes pierce the bad guy's hand, who screams in pain from the attack. The swordsman then turns to the fallen man with a cold, contemptuous look. He says that next time, They should go somewhere without metal to avoid problems. The rescued young mutant thanks him for being saved from that terrible situation. He then asks if his savior is also a heart mutant like him, but the swordsman interrupts him and tells him to be quiet in a very cold way. Answering a call, he confirms he's listening to the orders on the other end of the line. He then reports that he has recovered the mutant and can take him back to the lab. The young man is in shock upon hearing the word "clab" and can't believe what's happening. The swordsman says he's noisy and introduces himself as the dealer who's going to sell him. The scene changes to a lab where a woman says this is the friend she knows. She praises him, saying he's on another level and very reliable in his work. The pink-haired young man says he has one more thing to report over the phone. With a serious look, he reveals that he has finally found his old friend, Kim Ji-oh. The woman on the other end of the line is completely shocked by the unexpected news. He then asks if the reward they promised for capturing the hero is still valid. With a wicked smile, the woman confirms that the reward offer is still on the table. Then the diner manager affirms that he will deliver him the next day without fail. He remembers the fight and thinks that the protagonist is no longer like the skeleton he knew. His regeneration is so strong that he healed even after being taken apart. He knows that normal methods won't work and that he needs a place with a lot of metal. With that, he holds a pan of steaming curry and announces that the food is ready. A little girl in a wheelchair gets super excited to see the delicious curry. He smiles and says he put in lots of potatoes because he knows it's her favorite. The girl tastes the food and says she loved it and that it's the best dish ever. The young man pats her on the head and promises to cook anything she wants. Then the little girl invites her older brother to eat with her at the table, but he declines the invitation and says he can't because he has to go somewhere important. The girl gets a sad expression on her face and asks if he's going out again. He asks her to eat everything and save the rest because he'll be back to finish it later. The scene changes to the building where they live at night with the lights on. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the hero's female friend peels a tangerine in the kitchen. She reflects that her friend ran around all day and must be completely exhausted. The young lady thinks that meat and fruits are good for regaining a person's energy. With a determined look, she has a brilliant idea to help her friend recover. She then prepares a dish of ribs with tangerines and strawberries for the young man. The young woman explains a ChatGPT said the ingredients go well together and the flavor will be good. Looking at the recipe, she's surprised that she now knows how to cook such a different dish. Happily, she wonders if she has a talent and if she should learn to cook for real. At this, the girl decides to send a message to her older sister to see how she is. She tells her about the rib dish with fruits, and the sister reacts with a disgusted sticker. The young lady gets annoyed with the reaction and says her sister doesn't understand good food at all. She then tells her friend that her sister will only arrive in the middle of the night, and he can go to sleep. But the young man says he's fine and will wait because his friend might call at any moment. With a smile, the girl asks if he was very happy to reunite with his old colleague. The protagonist breaks into a huge smile and says he missed him a lot all this time. The young lady comments that she's never seen him so relaxed and happy since they met, and he agrees. He then begins to explain that his friend has been a very precious person to him since the lab. In a flashback, the colleague approaches the skeleton and asks why he's there all alone. The skeleton is startled by the sudden approach and doesn't know how to react properly. Ashamed, he shrinks back and replies that he was just sitting alone, not doing anything. The boy then notices the skeleton is missing an arm, and the young man yells not to be touched. He explains that the wound from an experiment hasn't healed yet and asks his colleague not to look. With a smile, the friend asks if he was sad about something as silly as that. The boy then asks the skeleton to give him his arm, which leaves him confused. Not understanding, suddenly, the colleague does something, and the skeleton gets a look of pure shock on his face. The boy turned his friend's arm into a giant blade, leaving him very surprised. The young man sits on the floor and asks if the new blade arm isn't super cool. At this, another lab collie appears and accuses the boy of mistreating the skeleton, but he defends himself and yells that he just made him cooler and asks if a sword arm isn't awesome. The skeleton blushes and thinks his new blade arm is the coolest thing in the world. The girl is completely confused by the reaction and doesn't understand what's happening. The colleague smiles and says the skeleton understands what's cool and holds out his fist to him. The protagonist looks at the extended fist, not understanding what that gesture meant. The friend then explains it's a fist bump to prove the trust between the two colleagues. They then do the fist bump, and the skeleton thinks it's very cool and feels like a friend. Back in the present, the young man says his friend was very cool and that he admired him a lot. The girl is shocked by the story and wonders why anyone would want a sword for an arm. Even so, she's happy to see her friend, so pleased to have reunited with his old colleague. The girl calls him to eat, but the young man says he's fine on his own and doesn't need help. Then she shows him the special dish of the night, which is a very different rib with fruits. The young man is completely shocked and wonders what that strange food is. With a proud smile, the young lady says it's a special rib dish that she prepared herself. He's never seen anything like it and is surprised by the combination of strawberries and tangerines. Even though he's scared, he decides to try a piece of the meat with strawberry and thanks her for the food. With his mouth full, he chews the food with a serious and concentrated expression on the flavor. The girl approaches and nervously asks if the dish turned out good and if he liked the combination. With tears in his eyes, the young man says the food is absolutely incredible and delicious. He praises the meat, the strawberries, and the tangerines, saying everything was perfect together. At this, he notices the little dog and asks if he can give some of the food to him too. The young lady says no because it could be dangerous, and the little dog gets a very sad look on his face. She then promises she'll make something tasty for the little dog to eat later. The young man says it's the best food he's ever eaten and thanks her very much for cooking. Happy with the compliment, the young woman promises she'll cook something delicious for him again. With his cheeks full, the protagonist agrees and thanks her once more for the food. Suddenly, the cell phone that was on the table starts to vibrate and ring, catching his attention. He sees it's his friend calling and realizes the plan is going to start sooner than expected. The young man answers, and on the other end of the line, his friend asks for help in a desperate voice. He asks what happened, and the colleague says he was hunting the guys from the lab. Upon hearing the word lab, the young man's face changes to an expression of pure tension. The girl overhears the conversation and gets worried, as she knows that was the place where he lived. The friend asks for help, and the young man says of course he'll go, and that he's on his way to help. Before hanging up, the colleague gives the address of an abandoned factory, and the call ends. The young man turns to the young lady and says his friend is in danger, and he needs to go help him. He swallows the food that was still in his mouth and prepares to run out of there. The young man apologizes for not finishing the food, but the girl says that's not important. He runs out and asks her to stay, but the young lady decides to go with him because she's worried. The scene changes to an abandoned warehouse that seems to be the location of the dangerous meeting. Carefully, the protagonist peeks inside the place and wonders if this is really it. Inside the warehouse, the young man finds the silence strange and confirms that this is the right address. With a watchful eye, he notices something strange about the place and starts to get suspicious. He then notices that the floor and walls are made of metal and goes on high alert. The young man observes the pipes and steel plates and sees that even the floor is covered in metal. With that, he realizes that this place gives his friend a total advantage in a fight. The protagonist doesn't understand how his colleague was defeated there, as it makes no sense. He then decides to keep his guard up, so he won't get caught in an unexpected trap. The young man imagines his friend tied up in some corner, trembling with fear, and gets worried. But suddenly, the swordsman places his hands on the floor and activates his mutant power. Several sharp blades sprout from the metal floor at an impressive speed. With that, the young man is hit head-on and lets out a scream of pain from the surprise attack. His face shows pure shock and the pain of being caught in a devastating trap. The hero is trapped by the blades that pierce his body, leaving him unable to react. Suspended in the air, he wonders if those are swords, as the attack was very strong. The friend then appears and thanks him for coming all the way there to meet him. Wounded, the protagonist asks what he's doing and if he hadn't been captured. With a cold look, the former companion tells him to see the situation with his own eyes. At this, it finally dawns on the young man, and he understands it was all a big lie. The attacker confirms that he was tricked and advances for a new attack with his sword. But the young man manages to grab the blade with his bare hands, even getting badly hurt. He then breaks the weapon and dodges other attacks that come his way right after. The swordsman doesn't stop and continues his offensive with several blades at the same time. His feet move with incredible agility, showing off all his fighting skill. With a swift move, he lands a powerful kick right in the protagonist's face. The impact is so strong that the young man spits out red liquid and is left a bit dazed. He is then thrown far away and crashes into a pile of wooden crates with force. Lying on the ground, the young man faces his former friend, who watches him calmly from a distance. The swordsman then says he's very happy to have found him again that day. He says it was strange seeing him in human form, but his voice was still the same as always. Wounded, the hero hears his former colleagues say that their conversation brought back many memories. With a serious look, he reveals that he lied and is actually a mutant dealer. The pink-haired young man stands still with his sword and a very threatening posture in the place. He then explains that his job is to capture mutants and hand them over to the lab. With that, he says his goal there is to send the protagonist back to that place.